All right, hey everybody, welcome to today's webinar. I see we've got people starting to dial in, so I'm just going to take a minute here and let everybody get logged on before we actually get started. We have a topic today that we've been looking forward to because we get a lot of questions about it, but it's not necessarily something that we focus on in these classes a lot. So we have David and Andy joining us today to talk about soils and fertilizers, which is definitely the foundation of everybody's gardens, but not something we think of as much when we're thinking of pretty flowers, I would say. It's definitely a foundational topic. All right, so for those of you who don't know Andy and David, they both work primarily out of our Fair Oaks store. David, are you at the Maryfield, the Gallows Road location on the weekends now?
I'm there on Saturdays, yes.
All right, so David is at the Gallows Road location on Saturdays, and otherwise they are both at the Fair Oaks location. So you can find them both there. And David has been doing classes with us for a very long time, and Andy, it's fun getting you on to start doing more of these classes. So Andy's now been looped in on the classes, and he will be doing them with us.
Happy to be here.
Take it away. All right, well, I'm gonna go ahead and let you two get started. I know you have a PowerPoint presentation and lots to get through, so thank you so much. One quick notice, actually, that I did forget, we are recording today, just so that everybody is aware. All right, thanks, guys.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm David.
And I'm Andy.
And we're the soil guys.
All right, soil guys.
Anyway, yeah, as you know, we both had a chance to be on here, which is great. This is the first time we've had a chance to be on here together. This is kind of born out of, we were doing some staff training, employee training in-house, Andy and I together, making the rounds through all stores this winter. And Sally brought the idea, well, hey, let's bring the show to Zoom. So thanks for joining us. Anything to say, or you want me to just sort of jump right into it?
I think let's go for it, and we will finish with a Q&A as well. So
yeah, exactly, because I just we want to make the best use we can of our time, so we're just going to jump right in, because as I said, we really like this to be a conversation, not just a lecture. But we're going to start. I put together a slideshow here. I'm going to go through it pretty quickly, kick things off, and then, as I said, we will open up for your question and answer. So your questions, of course, you'll send through the chat box over to Sally, and then again, Sally's going to sort of keep us all on track. So today we're talking about growing good soil. We kind of start with this premise that hopefully everybody understands, that having healthy, productive gardens really is dependent on having healthy, productive soils. That has to be the starting point. And any experienced gardener knows this. Any experienced farmer knows this, particularly in any kind of organic production. We take care of the soil, and the soil basically takes care of the plants. So that's why our focus is on here today. My role in this conversation is I'm going to talk specifically about fertilizers, kind of a little bit about the soil system. And then Andy's got some great information on how we actually achieve these goals. So in my conversation about fertilizer, I'd really like to start with just some of the basics and say that, first of all, we don't feed plants. It's plants that feed us. We are totally 100% dependent. Our existence, our life depends on plants. We get that mixed up and often think about it the other way around. So plants have this unique role of where they're basically taking carbon out of the atmosphere, they're fixing it in the form of sugars, they're putting it down underground, and it's those carbon compounds that intend feed the soil, feed the microbes, feed you, feed me, and everything around us. So it's absolutely critical. Our existence depends on them. They create the atmosphere and put the oxygen out that allows life to exist. So again, plants rule, not us. But when we talk about fertilizer, plants do need about 18 specific elements to actually create this miraculous process of capturing the sun's energy and in turn feeding us. So what they need is what I'd like to call some of these non-fertilizer elements. They're basically taking in oxygen, hydrogen, and carbon in the form of the air and the water that just naturally exists and has available to us, though of course, water is a bit limited right now. You know, we're in a dry spell. So kind of as a little side note, check in your garden, keep an eye on things, because if you have not been watering, you might be in a place where you want to do that. But then the other elements they need are going to come from the soil. So when I say these essential nutrients, they are broken down into quantities that they need. This is not necessarily the volume that they need, but in quantities. So when we talk about the macronutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, plants need these minerals in larger quantity than say they need magnesium, sulfur, and calcium. So they're all essential, but again, the volumes vary. Micronutrients, you can see there, molybdenum, copper, zinc, manganese, and so on, are equally as important and essential to the metabolism and all the activities that go inside the plant, but they just need these in very, very small, minute amounts. So these are all the minerals that the plant has to derive from the soil. So when we're fertilizing our plants, what we're doing is we're supplementing the soil with various nutrients and minerals to make sure that they have this balanced nutrition. Again, I make this, I equate this sort of like taking a multivitamin or taking vitamins in the mornings, where in the ideal world, you would be eating a healthy, well-rounded, balanced diet and getting all the nutrients we need out of the food we eat. But the reality is that sometimes our diets are not ideal and well-rounded and balanced, and they may not have all the nutrients that we need, or there might be specific situations with our physiology or health where we need to take supplements. So that's basically what fertilizers are. So when we're looking at a fertilizer, again, we use this word food, but what we're really doing is providing vitamins for our plants. So if we go back to that earlier slide, when you're looking at a fertilizer, trying to make a decision, you know, which is going to be the best for my use. Fertilizers, and this is all regulated by federal law, so you're going to see this on any fertilizer anywhere you go. You'll see these three numbers on the bag, this 26012 I'm using as an example. These are three of the macronutrients. If you remember, we talked about nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. Those are three of the nutrients, primary nutrients that plants need out of the soil, and they need this in larger quantities. Now, I might supplement this, like in case here, this particular fertilizer, we add some additional iron to it, and so on. This information may not always show on the front label of the bag. Sometimes it's buried in the small print on the back of the bag, but by federal law, it has to be there. And these are percentages by weight. So in this example, lawns are heavy nitrogen feeders. They demand a lot of nitrogen. Nitrogen is something we all need, but plants are using this in building their cells and building the proteins that they need to live and grow, and expresses itself in a lot of nice green lush grass. So this fertilizer is 26% nitrogen. Now nitrogen, it's not a stable mineral. Nitrogen's in the atmosphere. It's soluble in water. It's bound up in the proteins of organic matter. So nitrogen's always cycling. It's always moving. So this is what I use this word mobile of. So nitrogen is constantly being replenished through the environment in one form or another. Phosphorus, which is a plant essential nutrient, but in this case, it's at a 0%. The reason for that is that this is all under a water quality protection type of legislation that in the DC, Maryland, Virginia region, we use a 0% phosphorus, and this is a part of our efforts to restore the Chesapeake Bay, because when excessive amounts of nutrients find their way into the Chesapeake Bay, then it leads to problems with the water quality. In an effort to reduce the risks of that happening, you know, on lawn fertilizers, because it's such an expansive plant in our area, that has brought to a 0. So we basically don't apply phosphorus unless it's absolutely necessary. Again, this varies on the plants and the products, but on this particular one we're looking at. Potassium in this case, this is 12% by weight. potassium. And it is there because it's kind of like intermediate in its mobility. It can leach through the soil, but it's a very slow process, whereas like phosphorus, I forgot to mention, is pretty immobile. Once it's in the soil, it's pretty stable and does not need to be replenished as often, and that potassium is intermediate. So again, I feel like I'm putting all this information out, but these ratios, these numbers, they're going to vary depending on what you're growing, what your soil types are, your goals, your objectives. They're all over the place. So if you really want to get to the nitty gritty and figure out, well, which fertilizer should I be using? You can do a soil test. This is a service through the Virginia Cooperative Extension Program. We have the soil test kit available at our plant clinics, at all 3 of our store locations. If you happen to live in Fairfax County, they're also available at your county library. But you essentially take a soil sample, mail it down to the soil testing lab, and they charge $10, and it takes about 2 weeks or maybe 1 week for the basic analysis. And what happens when they come back here, they're actually measuring. They're telling me here, my phosphorus level is in the medium content, my potassium content, I think that's also in the medium range, giving us calcium, magnesium, iron, molybdenum. So they're giving us, they're doing an analysis of the soil, checking the nutrient values, and then giving us specific recommendations based on what's there. Now, the other really super important part of the information is right here, this little, when they talk about the pH. This tells us the acidity or alkalinity of the soil. And again, that is critical information, because what it does, it tells us the availability. So one is, are the nutrients there and in what level? The other part of this equation, are they in a form where they're chemically available for the plants that we're growing? So if we look at a pH scale, the way we read this right here, 7, right? This is neutral. If I start to go above this line, if I start going up here, if you see in this 8, 9 region, this starts showing me like manganese, that line gets narrow. Iron, that line gets narrow. That means that these nutrients, they're present, but they're in a form that's not available to the plant. The plant cannot absorb them out of the soil. If we go too far down this scale, you look at things like, the nitrogen, the phosphorus, potassium. When we get down here, way down the scale, the nutrients there, but again, the plant cannot absorb it. So this soil test result we're looking at, what was it?
4.6, I believe. Yeah.
So that soil we were looking at was like 4.6. We're way down here on this scale. So this report's telling me the minerals are there, but the plant's not able to absorb it. And that is why they're telling me I have to add 215 pounds of lime per 1,000 square feet to move this pH up into a range that's available. So the soil chemistry, it can get kind of confusing and complex in there. And most of the time, 90% of the time, you come in, you talk to us, we're looking at the history, talking about samples, and we're making generalized recommendations based on our knowledge of the local soil conditions and what you're growing. But if you ever take that extra step and send a soil sample down to the university, it removes all that guesswork out of it and gets you very specific. Now, that's just the soil chemistry. That's one part of the equation. Healthy soil is way, way, way more than that. It's also what I call the texture or the composition of the soil. And actual soil also, basically, it's weathered rock. You think about rocks that through the ages, through the eons and millennium, breaks down to smaller and smaller pieces, from stone to gravel, eventually down to sand, down to silt, all the way down to clay. Clay is the smallest, tiniest particle that there is. It's actually, you have to have an electron microscope to see a clay particle. It's so tiny. And because we live in such a geologically old area, such an ancient area, we have these highly eroded, highly weathered soils that we tend to have a lot of clay in there. And clay's not bad. Clay holds, has a very high nutrient holding capacity, has a lot of minerals and nutrients the plants need in it. But the problem we run into with clay is that it gets compacted, it gets dense because it's these little flat platey product, little micelles we call them. So your clay soil gets all dense and compacted down like this. And when it does, it's very difficult for air and water to penetrate, to get in there. And without air and water moving into it, and it's difficult for roots to grow and develop. And so it's that physical composition, the physical makeup of it becomes so difficult to work with. Where we want to be is up here in this granular structure. So if I'm saying, hey, I live here, but I want to get here. So how do we make that happen? How do we get that soil into this more granular structure? Well, I emphasize it's a biological process. It's a matter of getting organic matter into the soil, and that's organic matter in turn feeds all the bacteria and the nematodes and the mites, and it fosters the whole food chain that exists right under our feet. That we know more about what's going on Mars than we do what's going on under our own feet. It's really, I'm not exaggerating, it really is at that extent. But as we're discovering and learning about all the myriad of life that lives in the soil and the interactions between that, and also the interactions with the plants, we have to create this living condition by feeding the soil. And the way we do that is getting compost in there. So compost is really the answer, I always like to say, to improving your soil. Adding the compost in there is feeding this soil food web, which in turn is going to build your soil, so we'll get better air and water infiltration, better moisture holding capacity, more biological activity, and essentially a healthier, more functional soil. And now I get to stop talking, and I'm going to turn it over to Andy, who's got some really great suggestions of how we can actually put this into action and make it work.
David, thank you. That's great. Yeah, I'm going to try to kind of take exactly what David started us with, and using the word compost, as David was said, helping with drainage and aeration. But what is compost? Compost is a mixture that consists largely of decayed organic matter that we then in turn use to fertilize and condition, or when we say condition, go from that compact clay soil to more of the granulated soil that's more open, making air, water, and a shovel into the soil going a lot easier. That's going to really benefit our plants. We use compost for many different applications. So usually the first question if somebody comes in is, well, what are you doing? Are we working on our lawn? Are we planting trees and shrubs, flowers? Are we doing something with a garden bed? And we've got a cast of products that's going to help all of those processes. So I'd like to just start with just general in-ground planting. Right now, as everybody probably knows, that we've had beautiful spring weather, and plenty of people putting plants in the ground. When we do plant in the ground, like I said earlier, the soil in Virginia is a red clay soil. A lot of compaction. Sure, it's got great mineral content. That's why we're so lush and beautiful out here. But as a resident, we want to be able to put plants in the ground with a little bit more ease, and then ensure some longevity and health of those plants. I've got some bags of products that we carry. I'm not going to show every product that we carry, but we're here for you. You can come in and ask more detailed questions, and we'll have plenty of questions at the end of our show here as well. But Merrifield Planting Mix, wonderful, great, general use planting mix. It is got great compost content in there, and it's going to be labeled as an organic soil conditioner. This will put any tree, shrub, flower in the ground, and is a wonderful product to use to do so for any general purpose planting. And our Merrifield products, have been specifically formulated by us to work in this area, and they're all really, really great. Sorry, I've got big bags and a little bit of a table here. Planting mix isn't the only product that we can use to put plants in the ground here. We carry a product called Leaf Grow. It's a compost made from plant material that's broken down, anything from leaves, very small twigs, even some grass clippings that has been composted, broken down, and then adds great organic matter. And it's also a great product to put plants in the ground. You can use it to prep for seeding or sodding with lawn care. You could add it into a garden bed. Great all-purpose product. Leaf Grow, also labeled soil conditioner. Next, I'm going to bring up a product that a lot of people ask about, and it seems straightforward, but there is a couple specifics, and that's topsoil. So our Merrifield topsoil, see if I get the glare off there, is generally recommended. How I would state is when we are grading our property, if we want to fill in a hole, if we want to make our lawn more level, more flat, maybe we're improving our slope for water drainage. Topsoil is more dense than other products such as Leaf Grow or Merrifield Planting Mix. Topsoil is going to hold structure. I usually like to make the analogy of like if you had two holes in your backyard and you filled one with our Leaf Grow soil conditioner and the other with topsoil. Topsoil is going to hold its compaction. It's going to fill that hole up, and it's going to kind of stay the same. Leaf Grow over time is going to slowly dissipate and lower. That's the whole point of Leaf Grow. It's made to do that and to lighten and fluff things out, but then it just has less ability to hold as much structure. So it's all about application. Topsoil, our Merrifield topsoil has a compost percentage. I don't know if it's around 30% maybe.
I believe so.
So it also still has great nutrition, and it's not just gradation. It's going to benefit and enrich the soil as well that you're working, or the clay that you're working with. If we go from, general in-ground plantings, the next thing we might think about doing is maybe we've got some containers outside our front door on our property. And so we've got many products for that as well. Now, a planting mix or a Leaf Grow has a couple different properties that make it work better in ground. But if we're going to go in a container, we'd want to use something like a potting mix. And we have organic potting mixes, non-organic potting mixes, and their structure is made in such a way that drainage and aeration in a container is more conducive. And we've got a Merrifield brand potting mix and several other brands. See if I've got any fun things to show you here for our potting mixes. This is just an example. And once again, we've got different products, different price points that are approachable for anybody and everybody. This is a Spoma. It's labeled as an organic potting mix. This is great for any containerized planting.
Can you
Our Merrifield potting mix, I don't have a bag, but we also offer that. We have, once again, both organic and non-organic. A couple of other great potting mixes, just to show you a couple different options here. The Fox Farm brand, it's called Happy Frog. This potting mix is forest-based, so the cast of ingredients in here are derived from things out of a forest. They also make a product called Ocean Forest. And if you could just about imagine, this is going to be ocean-based. We're talking about compost made from kelp and crab shell and lobster shell and different things like that. But both great potting mix, great nutrition, great organics in here as well.
Can you explain, because we get a lot of questions about this?
Sure.
The potting mixes are designed to have better drainage since they're in a container. Is that correct? That's really why you'd want to plant with a potting mix in a container as opposed to using like a regular, like a planting mix. Is that the difference?
David, do you want to specify that a little bit?
Yeah, I would say absolutely that's it, because when you're growing in a pot or container, it's just imperative that excess water can flow out, because it's Having too much water, of course, can be just as big or bigger problem than having too little. So it's really the composition, the structure. Most of your potting mixes will be enhanced with perlite, which is inert material. It's like volcanic material to, again, maintain the drainage and the aeration within it. Again, you could use potting mix as a soil conditioner. You could do that, but your potting mix is usually going to much higher cost because it has these additional ingredients in it. So if like you're desperate and you're around and you want to do some planting in the ground and you've got some ocean forest on hand, absolutely you can mix that and use it in the soil as a soil conditioner. It's just you're paying for a premium grade potting mix that, you know, if you had something like leaf grow, would just be more affordable. But yes, they are designed for different purposes, but there's a lot of room and interchange between these.
Thanks. Okay, yeah, I just wanted to address that because we get that question. What's the difference between potting mix and planting mix on pretty much every class? So, all right, thank you.
In general, I'm going to say, but you're paying more for potting mix.
Okay.
But if I have somebody just is buying like one little azalea, they don't want to buy a big bag of Merrifield planting mix, I will sell them a little small bag of potting mix sometimes just because of the convenience. But it mostly comes down to price.
Okay.
All right, so we covered a little bit about general planting in ground, container planting in a container. Another big thing that is either happening now or right around the corner is vegetables and gardening, things that we can eat. Vegetable gardening can be done in ground, it can be done in a raised bed, it can be done in containers. Generally, vegetables we eat, produce, if you will, requires lots of energy to grow and become prolific and abundant so we can get really good crop. And so there's also a cast of characters, if you will, that we sell that really help our vegetables prosper. So with that being said, I'm going to just show a couple more products here. I'm going to start with this raised bed mix, and kind of as David spoke to earlier, this is labeled raised bed mix. Does that mean I'm only allowed to use a raised bed? Absolutely not. If you had a in-ground garden plot and you wanted to amend the soil and add more organics and nutrition, this would be a great product to work in. You could work this into a container, into a raised bed. Now the raised bed mix, just like the name would indicate, it's a mix of different composts and ingredients that are really going to help our vegetable gardens take off. And when we're speaking about gardening in that sense, we can get a mix of characters where it's got everything kind of already in one bag. Might be a little bit of a different price point than if I just got composted cow manure, for example. Now, composted cow manure is a wonderful product for the vegetable garden. It's one individual item that would potentially be in a mix, but if you've already got something you're simply trying to amend, you don't always need to do a full mix on an already established bed. I'm going to show a couple more bags of our vegetable mix, but I did want to speak a little bit to about amending or year to year annually that we can work more product in, but I'll get to that in just a moment. And just a couple other mixes, if you will. This Premier is labeled as an organic garden soil. So this has got a lot of good things in it, just like our raised bed mix that are going to help all of our produce take off, I hope. Bumper crop's a really popular mix. Labeled as an organic soil builder, we are building our recipe, if you will, with our mix. This is going to have, and many of these have a similar cast of ingredients, everything from sphagnum peat moss, worm castings. Bumper crop has lobster and crab shell in it. It has composted cow manure in it. And a lot of these ingredients that are listed on this mix, we sell individually. So we have everything from lobster compost, which is lobster and crab shell. I mentioned we have composted cow manure. We also have a product called dehydrated cow manure that's had the water drawn out of it as it's being composted to then give it more potency, if you will. Another raised bed mix here. It's Biosphoma. I brought up leaf grow earlier in terms of lawn care, but yet again, I mean, leaf grow can be used in the vegetable bed. Why not? In ground, in container, just great organic matter. We need to improve our soil so that our plants can really take off. And I got a couple more products to show you. Coast of Maine tomatoes and vegetables. Once again, could you put this in the ground to plant a shrub? Sure, but it is tailored more for vegetables. And as different plants want different things, there's things, as we were talking about pH, acidity, and alkalinity, some plants prefer a little bit more acidity. So we offer something like an acid-loving plant food. Think rhododendrons, azaleas, many berries like blueberries like more acidity. Maybe you're doing hydrangeas and you prefer a certain color of a hydrangea like a pink or a blue. Generally, when you're going to a blue hydrangea, you just need a little bit higher acidity to attain that color. Rose and flower as well. Once again, we're just showing that there's a large cast of characters that you can use to apply for different applications, whether it's from taking care of your lawn to planting vegetables, trees and shrubs. Are we going to be in the ground? Are we going to be in a container? And we've got a little bit of something for everybody for that. I don't want to speak too much to lawns and sod and seed at this point, as I think at this point in the season we're more putting plants in the ground, but absolutely lots of great products. Leaf grow, like I mentioned, and a product called McGill's Premium Compost is great for starting seed or prepping the lawn for sod. Just great organic matter to help that really take off. That covers a lot of the products we wanted to talk about. David, do you want to touch on anything that I brought up or focus in on anything?
No, I want to get to the questions here.
I do too.
What's on everybody's mind? Because like I said, and believe it or not, there's a lot more than just what Andy brought in here. And we don't want it to be overwhelming. The bottom line, I keep emphasizing getting compost, getting organic matter in the soil. We'll do it. All these different options they're just varying in, like I said, the applications, where they are, the size of packaging, the price. We have stuff in bulk, but we're here to help kind of sort all that out for you.
I'm going to ask one question actually, which I referenced earlier, but I did want to speak just a little bit to like an annual amending or getting that organic matter. So David, I'll just ask you as if I'm part of the question asking as well. So if I have containers at home and I had planted annuals in them, but now it's the next year, next season, and I want to plant something new, am I putting fresh mix in there? What would we suggest?
Good point. Because what I like to do is with pots or containers, there's no need to dispose of all that. I mean, it costs too much and everything, too much invested in there. So what I'll do with my pots or containers is, like, if I'm pulling out the old flowers, the old vegetables or something, tossing them aside, that usually means the soil level drops by maybe 25%. And so then I refresh it. I might add more compost, like I'm a big bumper crop fan, or I might, quite honestly, depends a lot of times what I have around. I was doing this early and I just had some of the Premier potting mix and put that in there, but bring it up, mix it in, stir it in. Compost degrades, it breaks down over time, and it's supposed to, and that's how it builds and enriches, improves the soil. So anytime I'm planting, whether it's perennials or annuals or vegetables, anything I'm in there kind of working the soil, I'd like to continue to add and refresh the organic matter that's in there.
I think we're ready for questions from.
That was actually our first question. We get questions on that topic all the time. So that was excellent, Andy. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'll just jump into questions. A few reminders for everybody on this call. We're going to take as many as we can, focusing first on soils and amendments. I'm going to try and compile topics that are the same so we get to as many questions as possible. If you are not able to get your question answered or you think of one later, you can hit reply on your confirmation email. That goes to me and I'll share it with Andy and David, or you can contact our stores directly by phone and they'd be happy to talk to you or go visit. So just want to put that out there before we get started, because we have a lot of questions coming in already. So we'll kind of see what happens. But with that, we'll jump in. The first question is, the soil in my raised vegetable beds dropped over the winter. What should I add to bring the level back up? So what would you recommend for raised vegetable beds to get the soil back kind of going for this?
So if we need to raise the level, I mean, a little bit to reiterate what David said is we can always add any of some of these vegetable products geared towards vegetable gardening, whether that be some more cow manure, lobster compost. And when I say cow manure, I should say composted cow manure, a little different than, dare I say, a fresh patty off the field. It has been processed so that it's conducive. Now, I think application is important, meaning if it's dropped a little bit, amending with these products that we spoke of, any sort of bumper crop raised bed mix, even leaf grow, anything like that is going to help. If we have a significant drop where we actually need to build quite a bit up, depending on how much you want to put into it, you know, you can rebuild too with some topsoil to help gain structure, but having that organic, rich, nutritious mixes is really going to help. I don't know if David has any other.
I was really glad that you brought up the topsoil, because I think what I see a lot of times of raised beds, if we're just putting more compost into it, like we were encouraging you to do, but you get sometimes where the soil's so light, and we ran into that situation here at Fair Oaks, that you have to water it every day. It just doesn't have the bulk density. It doesn't have the mineral components. And we just have, the soil gets so light that there's times when just also bringing some additional soil might be in there. So it's not one answer. The raised bed mix could be a good conditioner for organic content, but if you're having trouble where it's draining too much and you're having to water constantly, then I think that's where just some topsoil can be really valuable.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Okay. Next question from Diana. On my soil test I had done, it said to apply nitrogen only fertilizer. This would be for my roses and vegetable garden. What fertilizer would this be to use? What would you recommend for that?
So nitrogen only fertilizers can be I want to say a little bit tricky, because we run into that. What happens, like we're talking about the mobility of nutrients and minerals. Hey, if I'm building my soil, I'm fertilizing on a regular time. It's like, hey, the phosphorus and the potassium and calcium, magnesium, zinc, all these other minerals build up into the soil, but nitrogen has to keep replenishing. We have to keep adding to it. So in the realm of nitrogen only, in the organics, dried blood is really probably the best and most readily available one. That tends to run like 9 or 10% nitrogen that's in there. If we kind of switch over and kind of go into the chemical aisle, then we're talking about things like urea and so on. So they exist, but they tend to be, again, more specialty type fertilizers.
Okay. Okay. We've had a few people ask this next question about applying leaf grow or compost. So when you're applying into a garden bed, and we've got a couple of people asking leaf grow and one person just generally compost, how far into the soil do you mix the compost?
So let me say this. When you're building a new garden, because one element that we did not talk about, but is absolutely important to understand, is the element of time. Soils take time to build and develop. And we're talking about in nature, that's like over geologic spans, not human lifespans. So what we're doing, like if I use my own experience as garden, so I've been in my house like 19 years now. When I first moved in and I just starting from scratch and bare compacted clay soil, at that point, I really dug the soil. I cultivated and I mixed compost into the soil. I was able to get, maybe the top 6 inches, 7 inches of soil in there. And I did that a couple of times to really work that compost into it. Now, after I've done that, after I've cultivated it into the soil, I basically want to leave it alone. I want to leave a stable environment so that all the soil biology can get established. So all the earthworms and everything get established. So I'm not turning up weed seeds all the time. And so now, 19 years later, I actually have just really good soil. You'd be envious. I can go home and I can stick a shovel in the ground and no stones, no rocks, easy peasy. So today I want to minimize my disturbance. And all I do is, like, I was refreshing the soil this spring and I was just using some compost, a little topsoil, and just top dressing. I'm just spreading it on the surface. And over time, worms, leaching, chemical activity, that organic matter works its way in, it works its way into the surface. So this long-winded answer, I'm saying, hey, probably a new garden bed, soil's compacted. I do want to cultivate the ground. I want to mix it in there 2, 3, 4, 6, 8 inches deep if I'm able to, depending on whatever restrictions you're working with. But then once I've done that, once I have a good soil kind of established, I might be doing minimum cultivation and just spreading it lightly over the top on a regular basis.
Got it. So if you have an established bed, you can basically just spread it over the top and let it do its thing. If you're applying the compost on the top of your garden bed, how many inches thick should it be? Is there like a depth that you recommend that you're applying it to?
I'm gonna kind of just piggyback off of David's last statement, and not to be redundant, but it's once you've established, I mean, depending on what you want to, once you get your base established, it's just that, that top layer, and an amendment, a compost like a soil conditioner, like leaf grow or anything like that. Its point is to granulate that soil, or to condition that soil so it will dissipate down. But adding in, it's hard to say an inch or 2 inches. I mean, you can, if you're willing to go deeper and you feel like that's what you need because you've lost a lot of nutrition, or you've lost a lot of height, it's more working with what you have case by case.
Got it. Okay. So in some cases it might be good to spread more, but usually you don't necessarily need like 2 inches depth of compost. It can be less.
Again, the way I answer it is, and anybody that you watch my shows know, you rarely hear me say more is better. But when you talk about soil conditioner and compost, as a general rule, more is better. What I will do with customers is you tell me how many square feet you have, I'll calculate it out and say, okay, if we want to put a 1 inch layer, you would need 10 bags. And I'll say, you can go more or less than that, depending on what your budget is, how many bags you can fit in the car. I think also often becomes the deciding
physically we want to get that weekend or weekday.
So if I started a 1 inch layer, that's just like a starting point. And then based on the soil conditions, your price, your budget, what fits in your car, all those things come into play.
I also think plant material, meaning if I wanted a nice little herb garden, herbs have a shallow root system. They could be done from a shallow container. They could be done in a garden bed. Certain plants might have deeper root systems and might be happier in a deeper bed.
Okay. All right. Actually, this kind of leads us into our next question, which I know you guys don't have the prices in front of you, but we can probably talk generally about what's more budget friendly in terms of products. The question is, prices would be helpful to know. So can you talk a little bit, if you're going for a more budget approach, what products are good to use versus if you want the premium experience, what would you recommend?
And I'm gonna let you talk, Andy, but I want to jump in. One of the things I've run into is starting with the pandemic, there's so many people building raised beds, as an example. Once they built this raised bed, then they started facing sticker shock of what it takes to fill the raised bed. If I'm in that kind of situation, I'd like to begin, I will talk with our customers in terms of the size of the area they're doing, because what I'm doing in my mind, my first conversation choice with you is, are we talking bagged or bulk? In a very broad sense of the word, the tipping point is right at about 1 cubic yard. So if I figured that you need a yard or more of material, I'm probably going to be discussing bulk items with you, because bulk topsoil, bulk compost and everything, I think we're running like, $55, $65 a yard. This is a very general ballpark range, because there's delivery fees and there's a lot of other logistic things in there. If we're talking about bag products, the cost per cubic foot or per yard goes up significantly, but there's a convenience factor, what you're looking at, all these kind of different decisions that come into it.
Yeah, I'm gonna kind of
You
piggyback
can
on that,
actually work with that more than I do.
on that a little bit, and not to overwhelm anybody with any sort of math or anything, but David is referring to a cubic yard, which is an amount by volume. How, it's not a weight, it's a volume of material. 1 cubic yard is equal to 27 cubic feet. Many of our products come in a 1 cubic, 2 cubic, or 3 cubic foot bag. So if you ever wanted to crunch numbers and go, well, should I consider getting a bulk delivery or bags or whatever it may be? And like David said, there's some logistics there too. Am I getting it delivered? Am I taking it myself? You can do the math of, if I had a 3 cubic foot bag of material, I would need 9 of those to equal a cubic yard, because there's 27 cubic feet in 1 cubic yard. We're always more than happy to do that math for you here. We also have a great chart, at least at our Fair Oaks location, that will tell you how far a bag will spread. Or for example, a cubic yard spreads roughly 90 to 100 square feet, 2 inches deep. We could take a cubic yard and say, well, I want to go 4 inches deep, but my bed's only 50 square feet. Perfect. That's what a cubic yard will equate to on a 50 square feet. You'll double the depth. And we can help with all that as well, in terms of if you want to call us or stop in. In terms of pricing, yes, bulk products are generally going to be better on the pocketbook. In terms of bagged goods, things at a very approachable price point. Think Leaf Grow. I think it's right around maybe $6 or $7 a bag.
$7 for 1.5 cubic feet.
Composted cow manure, right around $5 or $6 a bag. I know things like, for example, lobster compost is a little more, just like if you enjoy eating a lobster, it costs you a little bit more than a hamburger, but there's many products. The vegetable mixes that have all the kind of cast of ingredients in them tend to be at a little bit higher price point, but you're also getting a full spread of nutrition organics that can be really helpful. And you just kind of want to decide how much you want to put in. I mean, it comes down to, just like when we were talking about building our beds out. Should I add 1 inch? Should I add 3? Sometimes it's, man, how much do I want to do now? And price point can matter to some, and yeah, so we do have some good products that are on the lower end, and some products are above that.
Yeah, if I'm helping you, you're going to get the same spiel where I walk you over to our prices are on a board. I call it my menu board. It's just like sitting down at a restaurant and you're given this menu and the prices go along with it. So we post all that in the board, the material, the sizes, the prices. And as we keep saying, this is such an individualized thing. You kind of make choices based on your goals and objectives are. But yeah, I mean, you could be running anywhere from like $7 to $30 a bag, depending on the size, the product, all these things. And the ingredients was used, so it's hugely variable.
Yeah. All right. This next question is probably for you, David. This is from Alex. My lawn is having a hard time growing. My property is close to the Chesapeake River and it appears to be compact clay. I'm thinking of just raking leaf grow outside of solid soil testing. Sorry. What are your thoughts on that? Would raking leaf grow be helpful for them?
It absolutely does. So you can just, what we call top dressing, and this is often done with lawns, but again, like you're saying, you do this in your flower beds. Top dressing refers to when I'm taking a material and just spreading it over the surface, not doing the incorporation and stuff. Now, again, there's no one answer on this, but oftentimes with cool season grasses, the best time to be seeding, fertilizing, building, improving your lawn really is in the fall of the year. So a strong routine to go through would be oftentimes as we get into September, we'll start talking about maybe even core aerating, which is a way to cultivate your lawn without destroying it, top dressing it with some compost, and doing that in conjunction so that it also gets in there. It's a good time for seeding your lawn area. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do it in spring, but that's usually a fall project. It's one of the reasons we've sort of de-emphasized it. And there, we're usually talking bulk materials, and depending on the size. So if you do something like a leaf grow, or we call a soil mate product, that's absolutely getting organic content in the soil. If you switched, Andy had mentioned like McGill's, which also has composted biosolids in it, that tends to increase the nutrient density that lawns also prefer. So yeah, you can absolutely do it. We recommend 1 cubic yard per 1,000 square feet to give you a number. That comes out to a little 3/8 inch thick layer. So this is just a little thin layer we're putting over top of the grass. But this again is based on the size. So if you're doing, again, think in terms of how many 1,000 square feet you have, that's 1 cubic yard. And then we're talking about whether you want to do bagged or bulk materials. So you could go for it now, but I encourage you to do some homework on that and maybe talk to us about as a fall project is something to consider.
Okay. Next question. Can you please suggest some plant-based potting and planting mixes? So I would assume that would be vegan.
Right. So most of the potting mixes are plant-based material. Every once in a while, and they'll tell you on there if there is any kind of like manure compost or something in there, they will put that on there. But a lot of times that's just avoided, not used in potting mixes because sometimes the odor and things associated with when you're saying plant-based, and I'm just taking interpreting question there. So a lot of potting mixes are talking about avoiding peat moss, but peat moss. It's a plant-based material. But if you're looking for a peat-free mix, and that might be where you're going with the question, we do carry a product called Coco Loco, which is based on coconut coir, and does not have peat moss in it. But most of the other potting mixes do also have peat moss. So that I'm not sure if that's what the question was, but kind of reading between the lines there.
Okay, yeah, that sounds good. All right, next question. If you're growing veggies and herbs in containers, are the raised bed mixes light enough for that? Like, could you multi-purpose them for raised beds and containers?
So, yeah, I mean, the raised bed mixes can absolutely work in a container. I find that once again, depending on what kind of vegetables you're growing, for example, I did tomatoes one year in containers, and my tomatoes got pretty tall, and I used like I think I used bumper crop that year, and I was a little too heavy-handed on the bumper crop, and my tomatoes got a little bit they started leaning over a little bit. So I actually added a little bit of structure, and I think I added I think I added just some potting mix actually in with my bumper crop. Now that was just a little bit more of an experiment for me, and it was having more fun, and I wasn't as concerned if I had a prolific bounty or not. But I mean, you could use a raised bed mix in a container. I would like to add on that note that if anybody doesn't know Peggy Beers, she's doing a vegetable container gardening this Thursday at noon, and it's going to be a wealth of information that might pinpoint those types of questions really well as well.
Yeah, she's great with container gardens. She grows everything in containers. It's pretty
Yes.
cool. Huge garden. She does everything. All right. Next question. I'm going to go ahead and ask this. I'm not sure if you guys can answer it, but if there's a soil related answer, that would be great. What's the magic for growing cilantro? I love fresh cilantro, but I'm never able to grow it in containers. Is this a soil question, or is there probably another issue at play?
Probably another issue. Cilantro is definitely a cool weather plant. Its happy place is like 50, 60, maybe 70-degree kind of thing. What happens is cilantro, the minute we start hitting about 80 degrees, and then by the time we go 90 degrees, what we call bolting, it wants to go into its flowering stage. So with cilantro, we want the vegetative part, right? We want the leaves that's in there, but its flowering mechanism, so to speak, is triggered by high temperatures. So once we hit high temperatures, it sends a flowering, kind of flips the flowering switch on. And instead of vegetative growth, we get the flowering growth. So this spring, real challenge, right? Hey, in January, February, we're cruising on 50, 60 degrees. Who would have known this? We had really good conditions for growing cilantro, but it was January and February. March was good, but then April, we jump up to 80, 90 degrees. That's telling the plant, whoop, go into flowering mode. One of the things that you can do that might help is actually putting some shade on it, because it's really not the soil, it's the temperatures that go, that trigger that flowering response. So anything that keeps the temperature down, like so throwing it under a little bit of light shade as we progress into the warmer months might help with it.
Okay.
I personally just don't even try to grow it in the summer. I think of it as a spring and fall crop, and have to go back to the farm market, the grocers, or somebody like that in the summer.
Yeah. Can you share a little bit about what makes tomato and rose? Because we have all those very specific fertilizers. Can you talk about what makes them different than the others? I know it may not, I'm sure it may be too much detail to jump into, but.
No, but I'm glad to. So I brought, just as examples, I brought these bags in. So I'm taking this as a place to kind of talk about. So what I brought in here, these are 3 all-purpose fertilizers, right? They're all labeled basically as all-purpose. The difference between these is, like, you can see, hey, Espoma is an organic one. The Jax here is water soluble, and Osmocote is encapsulated as a slow release. So you get into things like, well, do you want organic or do you want it conventional? Is it water soluble? Is it pelletized? That's again is where these things get just be overwhelming in there. Now what they'll do is, so if I say this is Espoma organic, Espoma will make rose tone, and what they end up doing with rose tone is they might boost the phosphorus content a little bit higher, simply to try to produce more flowers. When, like Annie was showing the different soils in there, so you see mentioned, hey, this one, for acid loving plants, but for example, roses need a more neutral soil. So they might take this recipe and tweak it a little bit. Tomatoes do better with higher potassium in it. That's one of the reasons we eat them so much. So they might raise that potassium level. A lot of this is just gotten out of hand. It's kind of marketing. So my point is, there's nothing wrong with using, let's say, the difference between a tomato fertilizer and a general garden fertilizer. Tomato fertilizer might have a little more potassium, of just tweaking that recipe a little bit for the specific crop that you're growing. So depending how far you want to go down the road on this, you can go with there. again, you'll look at like, so some plants that gets the extreme, like orchids. Orchids, because they don't grow in the soil, they're epiphytes. So that might be something very specific where they're, to get their nitrogen, it has to be an immediately available water soluble form like ammonium nitrate or urea. Sometimes are actually ammonium nitrates what they'll use in there. So it's immediately available to the plant because we don't have biological activity. So again, it's hard to give a quick answer to that, but these things, a lot of them are interchangeable. So you could use a tomato fertilizer on a watermelon. There's no harm done, but you might see a little better response on the tomato. Your rose fertilizers, like I said, usually have a little more phosphate. We're playing around with that balance of nutrients to try to promote better flowering or to promote better vegetative growth or something like that. None of them are harmful for each plant, but you can get a little better results.
Got it. Okay, it's 1 o'clock now, but I want to ask one more question for you guys before we wrap up, because I know it's a common issue in the Virginia area. If you have places in your soil that are retaining too much water, what can you amend? Is there anything you can add to the soil to address that issue?
So really the soil conditioners we spoke of are all speaking to that a little bit, both for aeration and drainage. So the conditioning of our natural red clay soil, which can hold on to water and keep things overly wet, is what we'd want to use any sort of soil conditioners. You know, I listed leaf grow, but there's things like a product called Superfines. I don't know if you have anything else that you would mix in there.
So there are sometimes sort of what I'm going to call more extreme cases where I actually start to change the soil composition, like we talked about the amount of sand, silt, and clay. People sometimes want to literally start adding aggregate material like sand to the soil. And I'm all for doing that, but we have to understand that if I'm using sand to enhance drainage, we don't see that benefit until I get to like 70% sand content. So it's done on large volumes. Sand-based golf green, for example, is 90% sand by USGA standards. I love, there's a product called Permatil that I'm the #1 fan of, probably #1 seller of it to enhance drainage. But because this can only, financially, because of the costs involved, it's usually done in very small localized areas. But there are times when we do this. I have this example where my own property sits at the bottom where the right drainage from surrounding properties come into my yard and then drains out, but it doesn't actually drain out. It comes and it sits, and I want to grow a boxwood hedge there. So I'm taking a plant that will not tolerate wet conditions. Because of my own stubbornness, I'm going to put it there anyway. So the way I get around that is I get Permatil. It's a stone. It's just aggregate material, but it's been cooked under very high temperatures. It's fractured up like lava rock. I mix a generous amount into that little area where I'm planting my boxwood. So it's too expensive and impractical to do that for me in a large scale. But there are times when we actually just start adding aggregate, really try to get beyond just the clay soil.
Okay. All right. That's good information. It's always interesting to me, having grown up in Florida where our soil is just like sand, to deal with these totally different problems in Virginia. But all right.
But compost is still your answer, Sally. Compost will improve the water holding capacity and structure of sand soil as well.
Yes, I know that now. Now I know that, which is good. I did not know it growing up. All right. Well, we're at 1:04, so we're going to go ahead and have to wrap up for now. But thank you guys so much. I do see we still have a lot of questions in the queue. So if you guys want to follow up with us, please remember you are welcome to call the Garden Center You can also hit reply on your confirmation email and send me a note. I will forward it on to David and Andy for you all so that they can get some information to you. We're happy to hear from you all. Really, we are. We love answering your questions. David and Andy love answering your questions. I love forwarding them on. Wouldn't dream of trying to answer these. So thank you all so much. We will be sending out a coupon and a link to the recording tomorrow for anybody who wants to access that. And as Andy had mentioned, Peg is doing a class on Thursday on container gardens for anyone who is interested as well. Anything you two want to wrap up with before we close?
I just say this was fun.
Yeah,
Hey, that was
agreed.
great. We got to do this again.
We do. Yeah. And just thanks everybody for tuning in, and we really appreciate you.
Yeah, awesome. I'm loving these classes where we have two of you guys on at one time. It's fun for me, fun for everybody. All right. Well, you guys have a great day.
Get us mixed up all the time. We put, the twins that
Virtually
we are,
identical.
exactly.
Yeah.
The twins. All right. Well, you guys have a good afternoon, and everybody who joined the call, thank you. Have a great day. Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.